So welcome one and all. Thank you so much for being here. Before we begin with anything substantial, let's get with what is most substantial. So please stand and we'll start with the Apolitikion. Any bishops in the room? Whew, all right. There she is. Blessed is our God, all is now and forever, and unto the ages of ages. Having ministered faithfully to the martyrs' needs, you did yourself emulate their sublime achievements in truth, when in contest you did overcome the enemy. Hence you do ever pour forth grace in abundant streams for all. O God, inspire the Anastasia, namesake of Christ's resurrection, and aid of them that strive in piety. Please be seated. Before I start in with the slides themselves, my name is Nikolas. You can call me Nicholas or Nico. If you want to put father before that, it's totally and completely up to you. But I just want to put a couple caveats out there to start. And number one is that I am definitely not the first to do this sort of thing. There are many who have come before me, one who's in our presence right now, Father Dimitri Moaritis, who I am humbled by his presence, who have ministered to and are continuing to minister to those in the addicted community. And so, again, by no means do I intend for this presentation to be exhaustive, nor, there's the bishop. Your grace. Your blessing.
Is that an empty seat?
Right in front, just for you. That's it.
Watch what you say.
Thank you, Your Grace. So, by no means is this intended to be exhaustive, nor is this intended to be something that is for everybody, right? This is a custom-fit sort of operation, and I'm just going to share with you what has worked best where we are. But before we begin, I want to kind of tell you a little bit about where we're coming from with all of this. So this is going to be, the 6 minutes is more for me than it is for anything else. This will give you a little bit of an introduction of where it is exactly that I'm coming from and how it is that I've kind of arrived at this point. So there I am, seminarian chaplain Nicholas. All this stuff I could tell him. I mean, it's just, right? Just totally ignorant and has no idea what he's doing. But he was hooked up with an incredible program at Brigham and Women's in Faulkner. And that's up by the school, Brookline, Massachusetts. Okay? And that woman, that wise and incredible woman sitting next to me there, her name is Regina Carter. She was my guide through the chaplaincy program there at Brigham and Women's Faulkner. And I remember vividly, there was one day that came within that chaplaincy program where she said to the three of us who were there, if you ever want to do something a little bit more difficult other than visiting people who are having knee replacements, come with me. And so I went with her, and she took us to the 7th floor, which was the addictions unit. And she said, I'm just going to leave you here. You go, awesome, right? She said, you go in and out of these rooms as you please. Good luck, and report back to me at the end of the day. And I did exactly that. I went in and out of those rooms for about the next 2 to 3 hours. Some of those rooms I was turned away immediately. Other of those rooms I didn't have any idea what to say, and so I just kind of sat and listened. And there were one or two rooms where the conversation took a turn towards what I would call enlightening. It became apparent to me that this is a population that not only is incredibly marginalized, but this is a population that requires a tremendous amount of attention. And that attention really is for those who are seeking it, because, like we said, there are definitely rooms that you're going to walk into that you're just going to be turned away from. And so by no means are we to consider the idea that anybody and everybody who's suffering from addiction is requiring or even at a point where they're going to be able to receive some sort of intervention. But it is to say that there are some who are at that point. And those who are at that point, it's a critical moment for us. And so I came back to Regina, probably looking pretty exhausted. And she just smiled at me, and she had the most perfect quote. Which was, "The harvest is plentiful, and it's not all wheat." And we're going to talk about what that quote ends up meaning to me later. But we're going to flash forward now. So I end up spending a lot more time on the addictions unit, and gets to the point where I'm starting to learn the names of the counselors who are there on the unit. And the majority of my time at the hospital is being spent there. Eventually, the counselors corner me. They say, "Hey, listen, we notice you're spending a lot of time up here." I said, "Yeah, is that okay?" I said, "That's okay, but we just want to know if you want to take this to the next level." Which again, right, this seems to be the key phrase here, right? Do you want to take this to the next level? To which, again, I'm all up for a challenge. And so they referred me to a program over at University of Massachusetts, Boston, which I could complete while in seminary. And so I was going to night school at University of Massachusetts, Boston, for the Addictions Counselor Certification Program. A part of that program is the practicum portion of the program, which is the latter portion of the program. So you spend about 2 to 3 semesters in actual classwork, and then the last semester is completely and totally spent in the best place that you can learn anything, which is the recovery home itself. And so I was assigned to a recovery house up in Malden, Massachusetts, called Eastern Middlesex Alcohol Services. That's the house right there. My guide through this portion of the journey was an awesome man who I had a great picture with, and I searched. I've been searching. I'm still searching, but couldn't find that picture. And so his name was Tim McCarthy, a rough and tough Bostonian, and would refer to himself as a Reformed ex-Catholic. But Tim loved the idea that I was coming from the seminary, and that this is something that I was pursuing while in seminary, and something that I, at that time, had expressed an intent and a hope to do in conjunction with some sort of ministry. And so he was always telling me, you tell that bishop of yours that Tim McCarthy wants you to do this, right? So I told that bishop of mine. He didn't really seem to care. But nevertheless, Tim and I had really grown in this awesome mentorship relationship. And at some point towards the end of my time of my practicum, he took me aside and he said, Listen, Nico, I'm gonna hire you after you're done here, okay? I'm gonna hire you. You're gonna work for me. I know you're leaving, but you're gonna be here and you're gonna work for me, and that's how it's gonna be. And I'm gonna tell you why that's what it's gonna be. It's because I need that bishop to know that I care about you, and I need that bishop to know that there's an important part to this that seems to be forgotten. And so then Tim took me into his office, and he kind of shared with me his story. And Tim had been in and out of recovery for the better part of his early life. and said that he finally got it down to a science where he was able to stay sober, but he said, I was pissed off, mean as hell, and angry at just about anybody and everybody who came into my circle. Those are his words, not mine, Your Grace. I'm sorry. And so he said he was trying to figure out, how do you find peace in recovery? And at some point, this reformed ex-Catholic found his way back into a church. And he went into the confessional with a priest that he had a relationship with in the past. And after the end of this long, really what he thought was a beautiful and very emotional confession, Father O'Brien says to Tim, well, you done? Tim says, yeah, I'm done. What's my penance? Your penance? You've created your own little God. You've made yourself your own little God. You haven't subscribed to any sort of higher power whatsoever. And so you don't have a need for me. You have a need for God. So find God and then come back to me. Which I'm just going to put this out there. As a priest, you really have to have a close relationship with somebody to have that kind of conversation. So it's not recommended, but the quote from Tim, I had created my own little God. So fast forward another 2 years, and I'm in the DC area now, working what I think is the absolute dream. I'm assigned to St. Sophia Cathedral as a deacon and working as an addictions counselor full-time. And so I'm getting really this great dose, right, of like, I've got my foot in the clinical world, I've got my foot in the church world, like it's all happy, it's exactly how I had planned it, and I'm living my best life, which was somewhat effective up until people at the recovery center that I was working at learned that I was an ordained deacon. And they went so far as to go ahead and put on my nameplate, MDiv, at the end of that name there. And that kind of upset me because I really enjoyed my life incognito. I really enjoyed the fact that people could treat me one way, one place, and another place. But once that MDiv showed up at the end of my nameplate, people at the recovery center started treating me differently. And what was concerning was that people who were in recovery, people who were in the program, people who were trying to get their sobriety under control, started talking to me and approaching me differently. And so it started to become this balancing act of I had to put the disclaimer out there on a consistent basis. Listen, I'm not here as your spiritual coach. We can have that conversation if you want to have that conversation. You've got to guide that conversation. But this is something that's funded by the state. This is something that is funded by individuals who have no desire for there to be any sort of religion or faith base here. So again, I can help you with that conversation if you're willing to guide it. But otherwise, I can't have it with you. And again, this sort of worked up until we'll call her Jessica, came into my office. Jessica wasn't a client of mine. Jessica was assigned to one of the other counselors. And Jessica had been having a real rough go of it. To give you just kind of a portrait of who Jessica was a 26-year-old girl who had entered into the military. She had been raped while she was in the military by a supervising officer. She was then dishonorably just discharged from the military. Went out onto the street, which again, I've got military people here who know that dishonorably discharged means you're not really reaping any benefits from having served in the military. And so she was treated like dirt. She wasn't really welcome at the VA. And she began using. It started out with prescription pills. It ended up becoming heroin. And that's where we met. And so Jessica came into my office one day, and she was just beside herself, totally and completely broken. And she said, "I'm broken and I'm totally lost. I have no idea who I am, and I have no idea who or where God is." And I sat with Jessica for about the next hour and a half, and we kind of tried to sort it out. But it came kind of to the head that this couldn't be a conversation that I could have as a primary counselor at the place that I was working. This was a counselor conversation that requires pastoral assistance. This was a conversation that required the intervention of a priest, right? And it was a conversation which, again, I tried my best to navigate, but this story, unfortunately, doesn't have a happy ending because she overdosed the next day. And so that kind of became the turning point for me, where I recognized that this can't just be something that I'm sort of halfway in and halfway out, but we really have to bring this to the forefront of our church. And so we're going to take those 3 quotes, and I'm going to show you what we kind of did with them. So what they said, right, going back to Regina, right, the harvest is plentiful and they're not all wheat. Thinking this through, and again, talking to a lot of these people who I look up to as mentors within the field, what this kind of translated to me was that this has to be something that's completely and totally accessible to all, because going in and out of those rooms at the hospital, what you're encountering are not just people who are suffering from addiction, but you're also encountering friends and family of people who are suffering from addiction. And so this becomes kind of problematic, right? Because a lot of the support groups out there are set up in a sort of way where there can't be too much conversation between these groups of people, right? And they're sort of segregated in a kind of a way. And as a church, right, my understanding of it is we're not really here to segregate, right? We're here to unite. And so not only does this have to be something that's accessible to anybody who wants it, right? But it also has to be something that is teachable, right? It has to be something that we can put out there in a way that's, accessible to anybody who wants to develop it, perhaps as a ministry of the church. Which goes to the second point, this idea of creating your own little God. Anybody who has worked the program or anybody who has been a part of a program knows that, again, most of the good programs subscribe to a higher power, right? The reality is, though, is that with a lot of these programs, that higher power ends up being one of your choosing, right? And so this, again, is another intervention point for us as a church, where in which we can help accurately identify who is that higher power, right? And exactly what kind of relationship are we looking for, which takes us then to Jessica's questions of who am I and where is God, right? It's an identity-focused pursuit here, right? Because what you're going to find, if you haven't already, is that those who are suffering from addiction are absolutely having a total identity crisis, right? They're looking for something that they are not going to find and that they don't believe that they can find within themselves, right? Again, as the church, we know better, right? We know that they are capable of finding it within themselves. We know that it is something that is meant to be accessible, that it is meant to be something that is open for all, and something that we can do together, right, as a community. So we'll go on to a little models and theories of addiction, right? So keeping all of what we've just talked about in mind, again, having workshopped this in and out of these stages of my life, you become exposed to a lot of ideas out there. Some of them have formalized models, and we begin asking kind of that question of like, okay, so if we're going to do this as a church, what's the best fitting model? Can any models of addiction out there? Somebody want to shout out just models of addiction? Cognitive, very good, absolutely.
Models of recovery.
Models of addiction.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So cognitive, right? So something, right? Addiction is something that takes place all up here, for sure. Environmental, absolutely. Don't just leave it to Father Dimitri, all right? He's my ringer here, okay? Any other models of addictions? Genetic, very good, absolutely. So this idea that genetics, right, somehow we're inheriting addiction.
Trauma form.
Trauma form, sure. So going kind of towards that environmental, socio-dynamic, for sure. Yeah.
Addiction is a disease?
Addiction as a disease, beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. So the disease model is out there, right? The disease models really became the launching point for a lot of these really beautiful fellowships like AANA, right? And again, these now just become snowballing, and because you have these fellowships that just allow for an acceptance of all of these additional models. But yeah, any others?
Mental illness.
Mental illness, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Addiction is a form of isolation.
Addiction as a form of isolation, sure, for sure. There's one in particular that hasn't been mentioned. I'm super glad that it hasn't been mentioned because I'd get mad at you. Moral, right? So that's where it really all began, right? And so we have kind of set forth here. I usually use a whiteboard, so you'll have to forgive my PowerPoint. I'm not used to this, but right, you'll set forth here, starting kind of from the beginning, ending up with sort of where we're at right now, right? So moral model, disease model, socio-dynamic model, right, which again, that's that environmental aspect. Psychodynamic model, which is where you get that cognitive sort of aspect. One that's very popular today and talked about amongst most clinicians is this idea of biopsychosocial, which is to say that there's biological elements to it, there's psychological elements to it, there's sociological elements to it. I love the genetic idea, but I have this tendency to be drawn towards now this new idea, again, of epigenetics, which is to say that, right, our genetic material is actually being shaped and formed as we are living, which is something totally and completely awesome and absolutely in line and in form with what we believe as Orthodox Christians. However, it's not to say that these models of addiction cannot be adapted. It's not to say that they can't be manipulated to fit the model of our church. However, it is to say that I think we're dealing with something that requires very specific language here. And that specific language, thankfully for us, has been with us for a couple millennia now. Yes, sir?
Could you define moral theory of addiction?
Yeah, so the moral theory of addiction is essentially that you've brought this upon yourself. It's completely, totally willed by you, and that you can stop your addiction once you're ready to be done with your bad behavior. Right?
Okay.
So it's this idea, again, it's a whole lot of shame is wrapped up in that moral model there. Or again, this is, and this gives even older, but the idea that like, somebody put a katara, right? A curse on you, like you've been cursed, like this idea that somehow you're acting the way that you are, not your agency, but again, all of this being said, we've had this beautiful word with us since the inception of our church. And again, I'm going to go through now why this word probably doesn't mean what you think it means. But psychosomatic, right? Looking at all of these awesome models and theories, and even some that are not so awesome. This idea of a psychosomatic model is the one that, again, under advisement, I kind of went with. And we'll see now how we can better understand that. So when we look at this word, right, we break it down in a way that is good for us as Greeks, right, because it's a Greek word in origin, psyche, kesoma, psyche being the soul, and soma meaning the body. The issue, right, with this word is that it has been adopted by Freudian ideology, and really when we think about what we're talking about as far as the psyche is concerned, right, this automatically also almost goes to where? What, when you talk about the psyche, what are we talking about? The mind, absolutely, which again is even a more problematic word, right? The mind, because we, again, as good Greeks, we don't understand this word mind very much in the same way that the Western world understands the word mind. What is the Western world talking about? If you have a choice of these three functionalities of the soul, what is the mind referring to? Logical. Absolutely, right? Totally and completely thought-based within foundation, right? And absolutely and totally focused on ration, right? However, this is not the way, right? This is not the way at all. So these words, logos, thymos, and pneuma, okay, are being used within the beautiful words of the Church Fathers throughout the ages, right?
Or the word nous.
Well, I'm getting there.
sorry.
Don't steal my bite. Okay, so throughout the ages, right? The psyche being a tripart soul, right? Which the tripart soul, we give credit to Freud for stealing Plato's idea, okay? And that's about it. Because really when we're talking about the tripart soul, these are the aspects of the tripart soul that we're speaking about. Again, the logical, the appetitive, and the insensitive. To give some definitions here, we already talked about the logical, the logos. For thymos, anybody, any ideas? Thymos, the appetitive. What would be a function of the appetitive?
I'm sorry to I'm wondering if I'm confused. I thought thymos was insensitive and epithymia was additive.
So pneuma, okay, again, caveat, right? Thank you for the clarification, right? So caveat again here, some of these words are interchangeable. Okay, so I'm going with what is most popularly used. It's not to say that the epithymos is totally void, right? But pneuma, again, it gives us a little bit more of a solid division, right? Because when you talk about epithymos, right, you're talking about something that's related to, which there is a relationship here, but at the same time, it's completely different in its operation. So, any ideas, the operation of the appetitive? The passions, very good. Specifically, right, the natural and blameless passions, right? So give me a natural and blameless passion, somebody. Hunger, perfect, yes. A desire to procreate, absolutely, for sure. Well, sex is the action. Sex happens on a bodily level, but the desire to procreate, right, sexual desire, for sure, absolutely. Yes, so we're going to go for this, right, for the thymos. Epithymia, right. So, but the thymos, if I may, Your Grace, is where natural and blameless passions take place. Again, as far as we've come to understand them, okay?
Love be one of them?
Love is a tricky thing, you know. Fear, very good, absolutely. So we're getting an idea, right? Okay, so these are some very basic level functionalities of the inner life, right? Which is what we're really talking about here when we're talking about the psyche. We're talking about the inner life. The pneuma, or the insensitive, any ideas as far as operations there? Conscious is getting tied into the nous a little bit more, which we'll get to. So think about, this is why I like the word pneuma, okay? Because we think about what that word translates to. Spirit, for sure, right? But also something that you cannot see.
Free will?
Right? Air, right? Free will, so free will is more of an operation, right? Yeah, for sure. Okay, but pneuma, because we have free will no matter what, without these, yeah. But pneuma, again, so we're looking at these sort of things that we can't quite put a name to, but we do experience. So the easiest one for this would be emotions. However, because this is the crowd that I'm speaking to here at Clergy-Laity, we can also say, I would imagine, that the majority of us sitting here have at some point in time had a spiritual experience, right? Something that is completely and totally unwilled by us on a cognitive level, and yet something that we totally and completely receive very fully and very openly when we're able, right? And so this idea of the pneuma, or the insensitive function of our soul, again, it's where that kind of takes place as far as we've understood it. Yes?
I'm not sure that it falls in here, and I'm
So lust, we would say, is an augmentation of the sexual drive, right? And so again, this is also where we start to get into these kinds of awesome conversations about how does addiction work within that inner self. So when we're looking at the functionality, right, of the inner life, and I promise we're going someplace with all of this. Okay, so when we're looking at the functionality of the inner life on a level that is completely, totally unmitigated, right, which is to say, this is definitely the level that addiction operates on, okay? As far as primacy is concerned, any idea what comes first? What's that? For sure, absolutely. Thimos, right? So this becomes the basic level of our operations. This becomes the king, right? Or Vasilevs, Thimos, right? So the king becomes the appetitive, right? What's next, do you think? Oh, I gave it to you. Shoot. Tricky arrow button. So the logos, right? Because again, if the thimos, if the appetitive is operating as the king, then it needs a servant, right? And so the servant to the king becomes the logical, because again, what we're really thinking about is, how do I get that thing that I desire, right? If I am hungry, right, and I see, Bishop Sebastian right there with a steak, right? The logos is going to tell me I can take that steak from him. And the incentive is what is going to fuel that action into a bodily output. Because I'm going to use that feeling, whatever it is. And again, because it's being driven by the thimos, right? It's usually a negative emotion. It's usually not something that's a good emotion, right? It's one that is going to lead me to perhaps a place of anger in the way in which I take that steak from him, right? Which again, if he's operating on the same level, then it's an all-out battle royale, and we all know who's going to win, right?
So can you
Absolutely.
Can you relate that like to the parasympathetic reaction to something? Like you can't really will that incentive.
Totally.
It happens automatically it's in your subconscious.
Yeah. So again, the only thing is just being careful about terminology, right? But yeah, I would say it happens in the operation of that inner life, right? That inner life of the soul.
It's the soul's parasympathetic response, not the body's parasympathetic.
I would say that that's an accurate statement. Yeah, for sure. Anybody disagree? Please feel free.
Because I do think when you start looking at the life that you're talking about being in between the insensitive and the news, that I'm actually jumping ahead on.
You're jumping ahead on the noose again. That's all right. So Plato and Freud, okay? I can't stand putting his name up there, but he really stole it all. So, super ego, yeah, baby, absolutely. So with the two of them, the logos is the Vasilevs, right? The logos becomes the king, right? The ration becomes what it is that should be determining everything. And so the receptacle really becomes, right, how am I receiving what it is that I'm experiencing, right? And trying to work through that, trying to understand that, and trying to come up with techniques, mechanisms within our thought processes that can stop us in our tracks and make a good decision. Which means that really, like, the thimos almost becomes a servant to the logos, right? Because it's where it's getting its signaling from, right? And when we're having that mind of the logic become kind of this place on high, right? It's the receptacle for all information, and it's the processor for all information. So then anything that's insensitive becomes a byproduct, right? And that byproduct is one which is oftentimes dismissed, right? That byproduct oftentimes is one which in certain circles can be subdued. In other circles, it's elevated, right? That byproduct becomes also something that is operative in its function to the logos, right? And so, you have these two, the themos and the pneuma, essentially becoming servants to the logos with the Plato and Freud model. Which then brings us to the church model. Any guesses? Pneuma, absolutely, absolutely. So the insensitive, right, this pneuma station within the self becomes the king. The logos becomes the first servant to the king. And the themos becomes the vehicle in which we elevate the pneuma. Now we can talk about the nous. Okay? So the nous, which we understand, again, we've translated nous as being mind, which again, I would kind of make the case that the mind is whoever is in charge, right? That's where the mind is, okay? The nous, however, which again, there's a big difference between diania and nous, right? Which is to say that diania is always going to be here, right? The nous is always going to be here, right? What it becomes is a matter of, are we cultivating the nous? Are we caring for the nous? The way that the Philocalic fathers refer to it is they say that the nous is what ends up transmitting grace to the body, right? And so it's clear to us that the way that the church fathers understand the nous is that this ends up being your primary receptor for all that is divine, for all that is holy, for all that is spiritual. And if we are able to cultivate it, right, it becomes exactly what we say here as the eye of our heart, right? And so we begin looking at things. We begin perceiving our reality through this eye of the nous. And what a beautiful reality that is. So we've got this model worked out, right? And I've got it in this place where it's able to be presented, and I'm starting to use it in support groups at this point, right? So we're going back to the timeline journey, but yeah, go ahead.
Is the nous where nepsis or watchfulness occurs?
Totally, yeah, totally,
So
for sure.
that's where the seat is, the eye, like you said, of the soul.
Nepsis, right? Nepsis being really sobriety,
That's what it
right?
is.
In the most
The word
perfect
is
translation of that word,
Right.
right? Nepsis is like the be-all, end-all for addiction. There is no addiction that can survive nepsis, right? True nepsis, right? So going back to our timeline here, now ordained as a priest, we're going to 2018, okay? And I have a wonderful proistamenos, Father Michael Ecarino, who begins to encourage me. Start having these groups, start using this material that you've been talking to me about, but you're missing something. I said, Father, tell me please, like I've been working on this for 3-4 years now. I've got this great little program, curricula put together, and I'm ready to roll on the support groups. Don't hold me back, Father, right? He says, Christ gave us the saints. Don't ever doubt what it is that we've been given by our Lord, because it's meant to be used. And he hands me a booklet of the Saint Anastasia's Paraclesis, which he had received back during his time in Florida and had been implementing down there, which again, just to further that point, I'm definitely not the first, right? Like, this is a long time coming. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here, okay? And so this idea of the Saint Anastasia's Fellowship is something that has really manifested itself, okay? And so I'm receiving this booklet of the Paraclesis service, and he says to me, you don't do a single one of those support groups without doing this. And this has become like the game changer for me, right? Because in the support groups, anybody who's ever experienced the support group, right? I mean, we're there, right? It's a beautiful confessional community at its finest, right? We're pouring out our hearts to each other. We're receiving what's being poured out. And at the end of the group, we walk out those doors and say, hey, you want to go get some pancakes? Right? Not ideal. Not ideal. And to be honest, could easily feed into another addiction. Okay? So the alternative becomes, let's take everything that we've talked about here, let's take everything that we've been doing here, and let's bring it before one of the Lord's saints. Let's give it to her. And when she receives it, she's going to receive it as a precious gift. And she's going to take that precious gift before the one who we offer everything to. And we're going to secure everything that we do here within the support group. And so really what we've just walked through here is what has become and ended up being cultivated into the format for Saint Anastasia's Fellowship. So it's a support group that first meets 45, 60 minutes. It's proctored by somebody who has and is able and capable of guiding that group, walking alongside of them, not in some sort of pedagogical sort of way necessarily, right? But more in sort of a way as, again, just sort of like a guide who knows the path and is on that path and is sharing that path with them. And then they are able to then share that path with each other, okay? So because we're coming from this basis also of the psychosomatic self, the resources are inexhaustible, right? I mean, we've got, like, this is volume 1 of the Philokalia, of 4, questionably 5. The 5th is out there, right? It's in India. You can find it if you really look for it. But, right, this is volume 1, and this is just Philokalic fathers, right? I mean, we're not even talking about this awesomeness that takes place when you do, like, an addictions or recovery-based Bible study, right? It's literally inexhaustible as far as material is concerned. And again, what we know about this material is what we also know about the grace that is offered to us through a service like the Paraklesis, also inexhaustible. And so the modality becomes support group, Paraklesis, once a week, right? Rinse, wash, and repeat. It also goes, hopefully, without saying, that the Saint Anastasia Fellowship does not look to substitute, nor does it look to replace any of the other treatment options out there. This isn't really treatment in the clinical sense in any way, right? This is more along the lines of helping people enter into the greatest recovery program of all time, which is the liturgical services of the church, right? I mean, this is where the sacramental life is lived. And when we really live it, right, we recognize that it's totally impossible. Like, it's totally impossible for me to have any desire whatsoever to go out there and smoke crack when I'm praying every 2 hours, right? And it just becomes it's not something that you can do, right? And it becomes limiting in that way, but at the same time so liberating. So putting this all to work now, the cultivation and implementation of the Saint Anastasia Fellowship as it's just been presented here. Currently, I am aware of and working with 6 active in-person support groups. These are across the nation. One in Yonkers, which has kind of ended up becoming the incubator for a lot of this stuff, has been going now for 3 years. We have a steady attendance rate, between 10 and 12 people regularly on a weekly basis. And again, this is not to including people who just come to check it out. Of those 6 groups, 3 others are operating outside of the direct archdiocesan district, but within the GOA. 2 others, and then of the rest, the remaining 3, those are 3 other groups that are actually operating outside of the GOA, but remaining Orthodox Christian. And so, again, these are groups that are really just kind of utilizing the material that has already been created, and going forward with this and manifesting them kind of in whatever sort of organic way as possible. It became super clear to me that this isn't something that I can just go and cultivate, and so we've now started, we'll be beginning in the fall, a group leader training seminar which hopefully will then be able to be populated as well. But we're going to start with the vicariate in Syosset, and see where it goes. And then as far as additional operations, currently we're trying to spread awareness of addiction. We're trying to put it out there. This has been effective through workshops like this. This has been achieved through homilies, having guest homilies. This has been achieved also through just even kind of individualized presentations from a parish to parish sort of basis. And again, the outreach is incredible. I can't even begin to tell you the amount of emails that I'm receiving and phone calls and this sort of thing. I can't be the guy, and thankfully, like I said before, I'm not the guy. I'm working on trying to use that list from Ocamper and also other resources to kind of cultivate regionalized outreach as well. As far as what we have planned, we received an incredibly generous Leadership 100 grant. And so hats off to Leadership 100 for entrusting us with this grant money. The money is going to be used first and foremost to develop kind of a standardized curriculum for Saint Anastasia Fellowship groups, which can be easily distributed in kind of just like a booklet packet form. From there, the idea is that we're going to establish a digital platform for these leadership training seminars. So that way, again, it just becomes as widely available as possible. And currently, in case you all know anybody, we're looking for a program manager to help out because I still am the parish priest at Prophet Elias Greek Orthodox Church, which is a community that is worthy of a full-time priest in and of itself. And totally and completely incapable of doing this work without somebody who, again, thanks to this Leadership 100 grant, we now have a funded position, contractor-based, who is going to be able to help out at least 10 hours a week, preferably with a clinical background. As far as what you all can do, there it is. There's the list. First and foremost, start out with the paraclesis, right? So I have this readily available in booklet form online. The resources are totally accessible, right? And so even if it's the sort of thing where you're like, Father, I looked and I didn't find it, I'll send it to you. I don't care, right? Like this is something that I love sharing, that I love to spread, that I love to put out there. We've also got this reality of having parish events, right? So if your parish is looking to have something that's along the lines of addictions awareness and you're not sure what to do, feel free, reach out. I try to be as available. And again, my thing is much more along the lines of trying to pass it off to somebody who's local. Because what we also have found is that that's what's effective. That's what's most well received. It doesn't work as well because we tried it where I was like literally going to 3 different groups within the New York area. And it was crazy. Presbytera hated it, but she loves me and she loves Saint Anastasia, so she tolerated it. But she said, this is not sustainable, and I agree with her. Because the reality is that, you know, when you're coming from an outsider's perspective, right, you have this person who's essentially contracted to come in and do a Saint Anastasia Fellowship out of your parish. They don't know who you are. The stigma is already there, and so they're already going to be hesitant to come. And then when they find out that this is somehow associated with the Archdiocese, they're even more hesitant to come because they think that this person who's coming from the Archdiocese is a spy for the Archbishop, and then they start reporting to Helleniscope, and it's a whole big mess. Sorry, I just can't stand that guy. But anyway, the final option here, after having that paraclesis service and holding those events, those awareness-based events, would be coming to that place of actually starting a Saint Anastasia's Fellowship at your parish. The way that this has been seen by our Archbishop, who again has been super duper supportive of this. Like the moment that I mentioned that we wanted to do this to our Chancellor, I had a meeting with His Eminence like within a week, which everybody knows his schedule, so that's like a super short time frame to get a meeting with His Eminence. And he's in full support, but his, I think, kind of vision for this is a ministry akin to like a Goya or a Sunday school, right? Like it should be available and at every single parish. Even if you don't have like a 10 to 12 person group that's meeting on a weekly basis, at least having a point of contact within the parish where if you have somebody who's coming for addiction, you have somebody that you can send them to within that parish. My suggestion would be is leave your priests alone. Right? Really and truly. Like, let them be the one to bless. Let them be the ones to pray. But find somebody else within the community to head this up. As far as what that kind of person might look like, what I would suggest and recommend is somebody with 10 years plus in recovery, or a clinician who's trained to do this sort of thing. And they can collaborate with your priest. They'll be there, and the priest will be there kind of presiding, right? That's what we're to do as presbyters, to preside, right? But not to be doing all of the work. So again, it's not to put more work on the priest's plate, but this is actually, again, intended very much so to help alleviate some of that burden. So with all of that being said, Saint Anastasia, pray for us. I believe we have time I think we have about 15 minutes for questions. Yeah.
I was just wondering, it sounds like you're making no distinction between those who are addicted or haven't dealt addictions and those who are affected by those addictions. Because are they all in one group and just all talking about?
Correct, yeah. And again, I think what the psychosomatic model does is it really gives us an opportunity to do that, because what I will give a testimony to is that, so I'll go from the outsider and then I'll personal, which is to say that from the outsider's perspective, right, I had people who attended that first group when we started 3 years ago because they were coming as a friend or a family. And within a year to 2 years, they're coming to me saying, Father, I think I've been able to identify that I myself have some addictions that I need to work out. Which again, when we understand, like from an Orthodox perspective, like what an addiction is, right? We're talking about a passion that is completely and totally running your life, right? Which that passion may be a passion for caffeine, right? And again, I know we're very like, oh, but caffeine's great, so are Starbucks and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you're still worshiping at that temple, right? You are. And it's something that's become an integral part of your life, and you can't live without it, and that's an addiction, right? And so again, it's this sort of thing where I think, to your point, right, it helps us, I think, maybe reframe addiction a little bit as well as not just something that junkies suffer from, right? This is something that we all can suffer from. Like, it's accessible to all of us. For sure. Yeah, Father Earl.
So is this being defined as a group, then whether it's narcotics or sex, or pornography, that these people can participate together?
Yeah, totally. So the group that we have at Yonkers, we have ranging from former prescription drug addicts to people who are actively in Overeaters Anonymous, to individuals who have yet to come forward but are there because they're suffering from pornography addiction, right? And so it also allows for you to be there without having to come forward if you're not there yet, right? Like, and so there's an integral part of that process as well, for sure, yeah.
In my experience has been that in some cases, addiction, some people in addicted to and with schizophrenia is kind of thing, in my experience, to people who have Sunday, who there's you should know this, and that Anastasia, in which case, they're told that there is no deep sea, there's no this. It's on the way, there is none, it's after. I would want them necessarily to root for it.
Totally. I completely agree. Yeah. So this group is, I think, as you perfectly defined it, this is for people who are really in active recovery, right? This is not a group, and again, we've had it come up where people say, oh, I've got my brother, he's an alcoholic, he refuses to say that he's an alcoholic, he drinks all the time, can he show up to the group? And my response automatically is, can he show up to the group sober? Right? Can he show up to the group without having drank that day? Usually the answer is no, in which then we can have the conversation about, hey, how about detox, right? How about let's get him there first. Let's work on those local resources to get him there. So that way, God willing, 2-3 months from now, he can start coming to the group, right? Yeah.
Well, I actually had two quick questions. Are you collaborating with other organizations or?
I love collaboration. I love collaboration.
Like
Yeah.
with other denominations or other programs, whether religious or secular.
Not really, no, not in that sort of way, but what I've been trying to do is kind of cultivate, so we're in the process of sort of trying to build a little bit of a board of advisors, and part of that portion of the mission is to kind of build a board of advisors who are coming from different parts within the Orthodox world, yeah.
Also, the second question is there a feeling that it's their fault for being addicted, or is they're addicted because of the circumstance in which they find themselves?
I think it's a case by case.
It's a combination of
It's a
both.
case-by-case basis, yeah. I think a lot of my experience is that a lot of people who are addicted have a lot of self-shame and guilt that they're dealing with. And so to the first part of your question, I think there's a lot of that going around. But again, it really is case-by-case because you also have people who are totally in denial of it, yeah.
So each one has their individual responsibilities, regardless of the circumstances. They have a choice. They can choose whether to follow one aspect or the other. So it's an individual.
Sort of, yeah. I would avoid using the word choice because for a lot, there's that choice aspect has been stripped of them. Right? Because again, when we go back to that psychosomatic model, right? When the themos is king, that's who you're serving, right? And every part of your existence is serving that king, even the rational, the one that would usually be the one saying, you probably shouldn't do this, like, let's not do this right now, or this isn't the best time, or, this could kill you, right? So to say that it's a choice, we start to give the idea that somebody who's suffering from addiction is not operating as an addict, really. Because to the addict, that regular function of ration, it's stripped of them.
So he's on.
Yeah, Father Dimitri.
Comment.
Yeah.
Addiction may not necessarily be the choice, but recovery is.
I mean,
So
yes,
they're not-
sure,
they may
for
not
sure.
be responsible for their.
The fact that they're addicts, but they are responsible for their recovery. I agree with you.
Father Anastasia.
Especially to the truth, being one of the groups we have before the Tarka, and it was said it in the wife of the line group. She actually, which was ambassador of the first support group when he was the priest in Trumpeter Springs when
Oasis, right?
But one of the things that I found, first of all, the individuals both an amazing resource for sure, helped me identify my addiction to food. If I've been able to help others see, you said it's not just about drugs and alcohol. Because if I pulling into my garage and say, you're not hungry, you just ate. And next thing I know, I'm at the refrigerator.
Sure.
Right? It helps other people realize that, oh, I see what's going on now. There's something, not just my drugs, not just my alcohol, there's something else going on. So, but your book really helped with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Father Dimitri's book, absolutely.
Determining the lost sheep registry to the alcoholic can have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, see, I got to get that resources page together, man. That's, yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
His books is must read.
And to your point too, Father,
Returning the lost sheep.
yeah, no. But to your point too, I think one other point to this is to say that the Paraklesis service as well becomes something which in my total ignorance, right, I began the Paraklesis service thinking, oh, I'm doing this for them. Foolish, foolish, foolish. Right? Because the reality is Saint Anastasia is going to work in the lives of every single person who is there and present for the group, most especially the celebrant. So as priests, right? Like as priests, I cannot encourage enough how beneficial the praying in the Paraklesis service to Saint Anastasia is. Right? Because you're going to feel her working in your life, and you're going to feel her reaching down into your heart of hearts and ripping out those things that shouldn't be there, which is exactly what she's done for me. Thank God. Thank God. Yeah.
I have people who come to the Paraklesis that don't stay for the fellowship.
Totally. Yeah.
They don't stay for the support group.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But they come for the Paraklesis.
Absolutely. Yeah. Which that's where you get to that community aspect too, right? Yeah, for sure. Lauren? Yeah.
Just nuts and bolts function of the language of the Paraklesis, is it always English?
All English. Yeah. Yeah. So the Paraklesis that we're talking about was actually written by a pilgrim to the Holy Transfiguration Monastery in Brookline, Massachusetts. And it uses very specific language to drug addiction. But again, if we're able to perceive it as any and every passion in a way is a kind of a drug, right? Then it's applicable.
There's
Yeah.
also an akathist to the
Inexhaustible cup. Yeah, for sure.
That's the
Yeah,
other one.
for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Are all of the groups men and women, or do you ever find it folks to have a men's only group, a women's only group on the day trip?
I have men, women, and children. Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, my experience has been that it's better that way, right? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, community where people don't talk about addiction themselves to that, or something horrible happens. And so we don't talk about it, and it's not happening. So how do you get the word out that it's happening and it's okay that it's happening, but there are ways that we can help?
Yeah, I think that's where those parish events help a lot. But starting, like we said, by just laying the foundation with the Paraklesis service, when people hear, I mean, it's amazing, right? Like, I don't know how many of you know Yonkers, New York. It's the Santa Barbara of New York City. No, I'm just kidding. It's a tough community, right? And not a very open one either. But when they got word that we were doing just the Paraklesis service, before we even got the blessing from His Eminence to do the support groups, we started the Paraklesis. It was amazing, right? It really was, because within that moment you had young ladies coming and saying, my boyfriend is addicted to whatever, father, and so I'm so glad that you're having this group. Which again, after a couple groups of her attending, then you can start to say, hey, do you want to, like, we can talk together with him about this, right? You know, instead of just kind of having to do this silently. And so it really is like you jar that door open with the Paraklesis, and then you keep pulling it open with the parish events that are geared towards awareness and support. And God willing, you get to a place where you do get a group yourself running out of the church. Which I just put that out there too. Like, I tried to do this at 3 other churches before Yonkers, and it didn't work, right? Like, it didn't work, number one, because they didn't want it, because they don't want those kind of people there, right? Which again, expect that. Expect it. A lot of people are very ignorant to the reality, or maybe they just want to turn that blind eye to the prominent issue at hand. Yeah. I think we could do 2 more questions. Your Grace.
What is the percentage of you talking and the percentage of listening?
This is too much talking. In the group, I would say that a good group facilitator presents the topic, and then the rest of it is all the people talking. The best groups are the ones where I'm not saying anything. That's exactly right. Yeah, it should not be a lecture. If it's a lecture, you're doing a poor job.
You don't say what you need is confession.
Never. No.
You don't say you're not a Christian yet.
No, that's correct. Yes, that's correct.
What you need is to learn
what St. Bartholomew did.
I would be first to tell them that I need confession, that I am not a bad Christian, or that I am a bad Christian before, yeah, no, for sure. It's not a,
They have to be careful.
for sure. Which again, I think to that point, it's why you really need that person to be oriented to the recovery circle. Yeah, for sure.
Can I make two suggestions?
Yes, please, Father.
Just one is, there's
Got to be at least 3 Sundays that you can have a addiction awareness Sunday. I love that one. Just the pulling down bars to build a bigger bar. It's key, drink and be merry. That's a great gospel reading to have that. You have somebody come in who may be in recovery field to actually give maybe a sermon there and to have a sensation or program afterwards. And the second thing is I have a ministry that no one knows about. It's the only now in this ministry. I literally have people who are in recovery who I refer someone new who's trying to get sober to that group, and they take them in. We don't necessarily meet inside the church. They'll take them to local meetings.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's an anonymous ministry.
Awesome.
Covered.
Awesome.
It's an action.
Thank you, Father D. Thank you. Yes. Last one, I think. Yes.
So I'm a pediatrician, and I'm terrified of the social media addiction that kids have. In your expert opinion, do you see any way forward by doing like a Saint Anastasia Fellowship night for kids where we use some of the same tools?
So it's been every year now that we've done an addictions portion within the Lenten retreat for our regional Goya.
Where you use some of these resources?
It's all of this, yeah, for sure. And again, it's more about cultivating that conversation amongst them, because these guys are so overwhelmed with people telling them how social media is going to ruin their lives, and the phone is degrading their level of existence. And so let them talk about it, right, amongst one another, because the conclusions that they come to ultimately are where they end up needing to go, So yeah, it's not even, I don't even think you need to be light about it, but just kind of, bring it up,
You
yeah.
don't have any kids in your groups with that particular issue. Right?
What?
You said you
in
do this for children too, but
Not, you don't deal with, include them in.
They have come to the Saint Anastasia Fellowship for sure. Yeah, they've been a part of that. I think that's it for me time-wise, but thank you all so much.